Hello friends, and welcome to the EPZ Pathsala, and today we are going to discuss media, cultural identity and trade. This presentation is part of your paper Media and Globalization. This is the third presentation in the series on globalization and media. While we have discussed globalization, trade and media in general in the past few lectures, we analyzed the place of media in the global media governance and regulation vis-a-vis international trade in the second one. And the current presentation, we will look at more closely into media and cultural globalization and the concerns relating to trade globalization and cultural identity. Let us first talk about global media. We have also discussed in the previous lectures, as you would have seen, or you would recall, that globalization is not a new phenomenon. It took place centuries back within the then contemporary contexts, though trading of media is a recent systematic practice governed by the new regulations under the earlier GATT and subsequently WTO GATTs. Globalization of media has been described by scholars either as a structure or as a process, both having their respective standing. For instance, Karl Marx contended that global thinking is an offshoot of capitalism, while non-Marxists like Anthony Giddens, for instance, consider it as a development as a cultural imperialism. When media is looked at from structural point of view, the reference is to ownership of global media and the control exercised by global conglomerates on content creation and content distribution. While most scholars studied the media impacts from the point of view of national cultural identity, very little attention has been really paid to the choices of an impact on audiences as an important stakeholder. The balance of power between global media capitalists and the national audiences has somehow tilted towards the national audience side after the proliferation of the internet media, thereby giving more autonomy to the individual consumer or the individual citizen. However, the basic fact remains that there is rapid globalization in the capitalist economies, including media globalization and concentration, though near social economies like People's Republic of China, for instance, are opening up and globalizing faster than even before. In the process, the global media conglomerates are also facilitating the process of globalization through media content and advertisements. There are two aspects involved in this. One, the import-export of global media content, and the other concerns the dominance of global media owners in media programming in various countries. In the process, the audience impact, or is called ideological impact, has got less attention indeed. There is also a debate on global public sphere, but doubt has been expressed if at all the public has the ability to systematically and continually follow up content and initiate and sustain public debate in a systematic and coherent manner. Similar is the case of organized network debate on the internet. Another important concern is the debate between globalization of national, local cultural industries and the national import of global media contents and production houses. Though there should be a balance between the two, the US government, especially the United States content, dominates in the process, thereby creating a sort of American hegemony in the name of globalization. The suggestion in 1996 by Brahman, quoted by McEnany in 2002, the reference that you will see in the reference list, that the locus, that is the location in context, the locale, that's the people's consciousness in particular culture, and the location, in this case the cyberspace, where the local world and the global material world together meet. All the three should be converged for globalization of media to succeed. In 1992, Ferguson argues that both the opponents of globalization as cultural hegemony and the supporters of globalization as a new and better connected world are in fact not well informed about globalization, and therefore they base their perception and arguments on myths and hearsay. One needs to undertake actual import-export analysis to see to what extent the global media cultural content is actually influencing national cultural identity and the individual perception and values. In one of the former presentations, we had discussed about McDonaldization of the globe and its adverse impact on national cultural identities and lifestyle of the citizens. Steger in 2017, that you'll find in the reference, he is quoting Benjamin Barger, his work in 2017, the American political theorist, who talked of infantilization, thereby saying that the adults behaving like children in appreciating and craving for global homogeneous consumer goods. On the other hand, there are scholars who consider the homogenization of technoculture due to spread of the internet as a good thing which must be supported. Now let us look at a little bit of, this is about economics, let's look at a little bit about sociology of globalization before we proceed to talk about cultural identity vis-a-vis trade. Let's now discuss the sociology part of it. Economists, especially the political economists of media, have focused on the economy of globalization, neglecting almost the social and cultural dimensions of globalization. At the most, there have been discussions on the structural aspects of media globalization. Three works I have tried to bring in which assume importance. One is Featherstone's 1990 work, Robertson 1992, and Gens and Kramer 2006, references that you will find at the end, which focused on the sociology of globalization relating to both cultural identities and people and personal agency by people. The argument that globalization leads to creation of global culture has not really happened exclusively in any society or nation so far. On the other hand, when people are exposed to global media culture through global media content, they confront actually images and narratives from other cultures, and what they need to do is to make sense of their identity through this imagined world which doesn't exist with them, and the practical and the real world in which they live in. There have also been discussions on development of cosmopolitan outlook, which can decipher the growing cultural complexity, and also that there is development of globality as global consciousness beyond individual and cultural identities, of course. Given this brief intervention about sociology of globalization, let's get into culture of media and cultural identity. As we said earlier, in 2006, the work by Gens and Kramer, you must study it. It's an extensive book, I think by Routledge, which puts together research on various media from point of view of internet, conducted through historical, textual, and anthropological methodologies on how media contributes to construction of national and individual identities. While on the one hand, the media representations contribute to cultural self-perception and formation of collective identities, on the other hand, it is imperative to analyze how do cultural identities are represented in the media content itself. There have been increasing globalization in the present context, and these have been pronounced more in the economic, political, and cultural spheres and processes. There has also been increasing migration across nations and continents, which bring in cultural exchanges and cultural diffusion. Media representations today are also becoming more transnational in this scenario. It is impossible for any nation or society or individual, for that matter, to refrain from being affected by the other cultures or other nations. With reference to globalization discussed in our first presentation in the series, it may further be argued that the local and the global are connected to each other through their intersecting narratives. Therefore, today, any national cultural identity doesn't exist in isolation. Anything local today functions with reference to the global. Therefore, even if media culture is becoming more global, the cultural identity is still understood in terms of national, or regional, or local, I must say. I must repeat what I said. It's very important that even if we consider that the media culture is becoming gradually more global, but the cultural identity of people, it is still understood in terms of what is called national, regional, or local. On the other hand, the changes in the contours of the local is not as much due to the imperatives of the local as to the imperatives of the global. So friends, there is no denying the fact that today the cultural or the media content flows more from the United States than other countries. However, Western Europe, Japan, China, for instance, even India, have also been active in this process. If McDonald's and science fiction movies dominate the American export industry, say McDonald's first put up a step out of US only in 1967. The Japanese contributed toys and games and gadgets, ancient medicines by China, movie styles and yoga from India, for instance. While the urban population is more exposed to globalization than the rural, the absence of full penetration of the internet also restricts access to global content. Further, scientific research and development has also been possible through global collaborations. Telemedicine is one of the finest examples in front of us. There are also nation specialties which other nations like to follow or even learn from or consume, for instance. For instance, the Singaporean research on liver disease, the Chinese medical approaches, including, for instance, the most famous acupuncture, the Dutch research on breast cancer, the Indian low cost and high quality medical tourism and colorful Bollywood movies. Recent example being Dangal, which is doing very well in China, among others. Now let us look at the media products. Media and telecommunications are equally treated as goods and services in the international trade language. Therefore, whether media should be treated as a product. Not only they are treated as commodities, but more and more people today live through media and are shaped by media. So, mediated communication is the largest form of communication today. Media also acts as a tool which facilitates people to interpret and understand the world better. But should media be treated as a product? This is what the International Trade Regulation and the global traders of media think. To treat this either as a product or as a way of life, one needs to distinguish between these as an economic activity within industrial regulation and also socio-cultural political activity within societal regulation. Now let us look at the trade in audiovisual services. The audiovisual sector may be analyzed from both economic as well as socio-cultural points of view, though often the economic aspect dominates in the context of globalization. Film and television are the most important media within this sector. They bring out two types of product. One is content and the other is advertisement. Content which provides value to the consumers or audiences, and advertisement, this is more specifically to influence the audience. Unlike other goods and services, the value of content in terms of meaning and impact doesn't get reduced either due to repeated consumption or by more than one individual at the same point of time. The meaning conveyed by or through the content cannot be equated to any goods and services for that matter. Also, one of the reasons why there is increasing corporatization in television and film industry is that the production of such content is risky in terms of high cost and uncertainty of audience acceptance. This also further determines the advertisement revenue. The advertising industry for global television earns almost nearly 40% of the total revenue generated from television, and which is a high amount, advertising taking the share of up to almost 40%. Due to high cost as well as uncertainty, as we have discussed, it involves high risk, which only global billionaires can afford to undertake. And therefore, it's not surprising that corporate culture has got into the audiovisual field. Since the English language is dominating the world communication, the American companies have an edge over others. While globalization has favored the American companies more than others, it has also indirectly favored other international and national languages, like for instance Indian and Chinese. In Hong Kong cinema, Chinese and Indian cinema, to get globalized through the media content. Even if production is in-house or in-country, the content distribution could be global. As we have already discussed, media globalization and trade has been possible largely due to joint production and sharing of costs, or co-production and sharing of costs, and also due to international distribution of finished products through acquisition of distribution rights and also the dubbing rights. Now let us look at trade globalization and cultural identity a little more closely. In spite of the hype that we found today about globalization and especially media globalization, the fact remains that many people in the developing countries do not have full access to all the media. Even the program production, distribution and advertisement remain at the hands of a few global conglomerates. In 2000, actually, as you would see in the references, Footer and Graeber, they noted that the open society that globalization brings in, instead of opening up, is creating a perception of authoritarianism in the minds of the people, which in turn affects their national and cultural identity. Besides bringing in political fragmentation, people generally resort to forms of expression that are more indigenous rather than global. In place of cultural diversity, further globalization may compel cultural homogeneity too. UNESCO, in its World Commission on Culture and Development in 1995 and its final report in 1998, which is called the World Culture Report, had remarked that those countries which still followed domestic program production based on their indigenous culture are better placed to react to and contain the global onslaught of Western media content. On the other hand, since domestic production of media content, especially for television and movies, is provided with very meager investment, the big budget and grand television and movie programs of Hollywood, in fact, overshadows national or local productions. It creates a hype in the minds of the people and especially the children and youth in the developing world. The developing countries have therefore resorted to import restrictions and tax exemption measures for domestic production so as to contain the global, in this case, the Hollywood onslaught. Also, countries use the Article 3 of GATT to impose higher tax on imported films and media programs under the guise of national treatment, within quote, national treatment. Article 2 and Article 3.1 of GATT of 1995 requires equal treatment of foreign media content distributors, which some countries have violated by favoring some countries over the other countries. For instance, the case at hand is a 1998 dispute between Canada and European communities, where the Canadian government favored the American companies over the European companies, for instance. Insofar as WTO GATS is concerned, the most sensitive aspect is the media distribution services, which greatly affects the relationship between international trade and indigenous cultural identity. Today, for instance, the small indigenous publishers, media producers, and distributors, who are very small, find it very hard to compete with a few global moguls, media moguls, and therefore the competition becomes uneven. Though Hong Kong and India are the second and the third film production countries after the United States, the United States has dominated over Hong Kong and India in terms of international distribution, in especially the largest market of Europe. Consequently, the European producers and distributors have suffered largely at the hands of the American media barons. As we have already discussed, the contention of the United States that the digital content be available on the internet should be considered as, within quote, virtual goods, and therefore subject to international trade competition, is still unresolved. In this context, the role of the internet assumes considerable significance. The internet is, as you know, is the fastest expanding media today. In this 2017 work, Manfred Steger on globalization, published by the Oxford University Press, very small book, you must read it, very interesting. He notes that the speed of internet activity is taking place in every 1 minute or 60 seconds. If we look at this observation, it is not surprising that almost all the global conglomerates resort to internet for media trade and trading the media itself. The internet has diluted the cultural identities online and therefore needs to be considered very carefully in terms of global media trade as well as cultural identity vis-a-vis globalization. Therefore, we are now concluding this program by simply saying, summarizing what we discussed so far. We discussed that if at all media is treated as a product, and to what extent media products are treated as international trade of goods and services. We pointed out that Western and especially the American companies are dominating the global media trade, thereby imposing cultural content from outside with the risk of putting national and individual identities certainly at risk. In the process, though many of the national specialized services are getting globalized with possible access to various nations and individuals. The situation is getting murkier day by day, especially after the spread of internet and digitization of the media content. It is still under dispute as to whether digital content and especially those available on the internet should be treated as virtual goods and be covered within the WTO GATS. Friends, do attempt the questions in the self-evaluate quadrant, and for further reading, suggestions are also given. Please do read very carefully, and we look forward to see you in the next program. Thank you very much.